The wind had a strange weight to it that morning, dry, dust-smeared but slow, as if the sky itself hadn't slept. On the edge of a field where nothing grew anymore, a man leaned against a rusted gate, boots sunk in clay, staring at what, he thought, at first was just a stray dog pulling garbage across the road. But it didn't move like garbage, and the dog wasn't moving like a stray dot. It was a wiry black and brown mix, ribs faintly showing, one ear torn near the edge like old paper. She was dragging something heavy behind her, not in her teeth, but clutched awkwardly in her jaws by one corner. A soaked, dirt-caked blanket. The fabric caught on roots, tore over stones, flapped like it didn't want to follow, but the dog kept going, limping now and then, but never letting go. The man didn't call out. He didn't move. There was something about the way she moved, not frantic, not afraid, but steady, like she'd already crossed places that no longer mattered. Her eyes flicked up at him just once as she passed, not pausing, not pleading, just registering, as if to say, "You are not part of this." Beyond the road, she turned down a disused tractor path, the blanket dragging behind her like a second body. The man, Daniel was his name, though no one used it lately, watched until her shape was swallowed by the trees. Then, without fully understanding why, he followed. The path hadn't been used in years. Brambles had started to reclaim it, and birds overhead croaked warnings like old women muttering about the past. Daniel ducked a low branch, caught sight of her again near a dry creek bed. She had stopped, just briefly, to adjust the grip. He saw her nudge something beneath the folds. Not sniff, not paw, nudge, like checking whether a hand was still warm. Then she picked up the edge again and kept moving. She didn't know he was behind her, or maybe she did and didn't care. Half an hour passed. The land dipped and rose, sun slanting now through half-bare trees. It was too warm for late autumn. Everything felt wrong, not dangerous, not tragic, just wrong in a way you couldn't name. The kind of wrong that settles in your chest like old regret. Eventually, she reached a clearing, half-collapsed fencing, the remnants of a shed where the roof had fallen inward, and beside it, a crumbling concrete trough filled with rainwater. Gone algae green here. She stopped. She let go of the blanket and stood still, panting softly. Daniel hung back. From this distance, he could finally see that the blanket was wrapped around something more than just dirt and debris. A corner had come loose. There was fur, not hers, softer, lighter in color. Still, she didn't whine. She didn't try to rouse it. She just lay down beside it, curled herself close, and rested her muzzle on the fabric. For a long time she didn't move. The field held its breath. Daniel exhaled slowly, unsure if he'd been holding it. He stepped forward, boots crunching dry grass, and the dog looked up. This time she didn't avert her gaze. Up close, the truth became unbearable. It wasn't garbage. It wasn't even just a blanket. It was a bundle, something carefully, almost delicately arranged. He crouched, hesitated, and gently peeled back the damp edge there. Nestled in the heart of the bundle was a shape so small, and still it might have been mistaken for a toy. A pup, no bigger than a shoe, eyes closed, chest unmoving. Clean, in a strange way, as if she'd licked it one last time before wrapping it up. She had carried it here, not to bury it, not to leave it, but to be beside it, again, in whatever place had once been theirs. Daniel didn't speak. What would he even say? The dog didn't growl, didn't guard. She just lowered her head again, breathing shallow, eyes still locked on his. Not asking, not accusing, just holding something ancient and tired behind those eyes, a loyalty that refused to stop just because the body did. And then, from inside the blanket, movement, barely perceptible, a shift in the folds, a tremble that might have been wind or not. Daniel froze. Did she? The blanket stirred again once, and then stopped. For a moment, nothing moved. The blanket lay still again, limp in the yellowing light. Daniel stared, uncertain whether he'd imagined it to twitch, the tiny shiver, but the dog hadn't. She was up now, standing stiff-legged over the bundle, her breath sharp and shallow, not in panic, in readiness. As if she knew that whatever came next, she had to bear witness to it. Daniel crouched again, slower this time. He reached one hand toward the edge of the blanket, but she growled, not viciously, just enough to say, "Not yet." Her body blocked his reach, ribs visible beneath the matted fur, tail low but not tucked. It was the posture of someone who had nothing left to lose but still wouldn't hand it over. Then, the faintest sound. A wet gasp, not from her, from within. The pup stirred, its mouth parted, another twitch in the front paw. No cry, no full breath yet, but there was life. Daniel stepped back instinctively, heart jolting, not with joy, but with dread. He'd seen this kind of moment before, years ago, in places where calves were born too soon or lambs pulled too late from cold ditches, that limbo where life hangs on a breath thinner than thread. Most didn't last, but some clawed their way back. The dog circled once, pressed her nose into the folds again, nudging, urging. The pup shivered in response, a slow, shallow reflex like its body was trying to remember what warmth felt like. But she couldn't give it enough. Not in this damp hollow, not with her own body running near empty. Daniel's gaze moved to the trough, Stagnant water, rank with algae. But near the collapsed shed, there was an old metal pail tipped on its side. He walked to it, tapped the rust free with his boot, and turned it upright. Then, with slow steps so she wouldn't think he was circling her, he filled it with what little clean water he had in his canteen. When he set it down and stepped away, the dog didn't move. She watched as a soft wind rustled the long grass. It sounded like breathing. Then came the twist, not from the dog, not from the man, but from the earth itself. From the far end of the clearing, just past the shed, came a movement that wasn't wind. Ahead, low to the ground, another dog. Older muzzle-grayed eyes, fogged slightly with age. No collar, no sound. It stepped forward slowly, with the cautious grace of something that had known both welcome and warning. Daniel turned halfway, then froze. The first dog hadn't reacted with aggression. Instead, she raised her head and gave the faintest whimper. Not warning, not distress. Recognition. The old male paused. Then, without sound, he approached the blanket and lay down beside her, nose gently brushing the pup. This wasn't random. This was a place they had once shared. Daniel realized he was standing at the edge of something he didn't yet understand. Not just animal instinct, not just survival, but memory. These two had come back to a place of meaning, a place the pup had never seen, but they remembered. As the light began to slip behind the trees, Daniel took off his jacket and stepped closer again. Slowly, deliberately, he laid it out beside the blanket, a dry barrier between the earth and the fragile body that barely breathed. The dogs didn't move. The younger curled around the pup again, head low. The older watched Daniel not with suspicion, but with a kind of resigned awareness, as if he, too, understood that something had shifted. Above them, clouds thickened, the sky going pewter. A drizzle began, soft, not enough to soak, but enough to change the smell of the air. Enough to carry the scent of the past across wet leaves and moss. And then the pup opened its eyes. Not fully. Just a flutter, unfocused, unaware, but undeniable. Daniel stepped back, hands loose at his sides, unsure if he should feel hope or fear. Because this moment wasn't a victory. It was a beginning. And beginnings, especially ones born in ruin, often demand more than we're ready to give. The drizzle gathered weight. The dogs stayed curled around the pup, silent but alert. And somewhere deep in Daniel's chest, a quiet unease began to grow, not because of what he saw, but because of what he didn't yet know. Behind the shed, the underbrush rustled again. But this time it wasn't the wind. For a long moment, nothing moved. The blanket was still again, as if the tremble had never happened. But the dog had seen it too. Her ears perked forward, her head lifted, trembling slightly. Her body didn't rush, didn't panic. She simply inched closer, pressed her nose to the soft lump hidden beneath the folds, and waited. Daniel watched from a crouch, his knees aching now from the cold earth. The air had thickened. The sun, once slanting gold, now dimmed under the pale edge of oncoming clouds. A breeze moved through the clearing with a low, indecisive hum, brushing the tall grass but carrying no scent of relief. It was the kind of wind that arrives before something breaks. Then, a sound. Not a bark, not a cry. A wet, short gasp. The sort that slips out before a body remembers how to breathe. The dog tensed and whimpered softly, just once. She nudged the blanket with the side of her face, unfolded it with a delicacy that did not match her mud-caked paws. Daniel rose slowly. The pup, impossibly small, was no longer still. Its side moved now, barely rising in short, staggered intervals. The muzzle twitched. The back leg gave a faint kick. It had not died in the night, as he'd thought. It had stayed curled, in the damp silence, suspended between two worlds, waiting for something or someone to call it back. The dog pressed her nose into its fur and remained still. No licking, no mothering gestures. Just presence, a kind of silent permission. You may return now. The pup's breath came again, faint and uncertain. Then again. Daniel stepped forward without thinking, unsure what he meant to do. The dog looked at him sharply, not with aggression but something harder, protective. Yes, but there was confusion, too. Not the kind born of threat, but of uncertainty. She had brought it here, yes, but had she meant to save it? That was when he noticed the blood. A faint trail down the dog's hind leg, half-dried, flaked into the dirt where she lay. Not from the journey. It was older than that. A gash just under the flank, hidden beneath fur matted by rain and soil. Her movements had been slowing, not just from grief. She was losing strength. He crouched beside her, extending his hand slowly. She didn't move. Her eyes followed him, but she didn't retreat. When he touched the edge of the blanket, she let him. When his fingers brushed the pup's side, she closed her eyes. The pup was cold but alive, not yet rooted to this world, but tethered now by fragile thread. Daniel glanced at the wound again. She'd likely torn herself crossing something sharp, maybe fencing, maybe debris from the roadside. The journey had cost her, yet still she dragged the weight behind her, not just her pup, but something else. A memory, a duty, a promise no one else heard. He wrapped the pup tighter, using the driest corner of the blanket. As he lifted it gently, the dog rose to unsteady, but insistent. Her gaze flicked from the pup to Daniel, then to the field's edge. There was no panic in her, no begging, just a posture of decision. She would follow. They walked slowly. The air had shifted again. That earlier breeze had gathered muscle. It now dragged leaves along the trail in sharp, erratic spirals. The first raindrop hit Daniel's wrist, just as they reached the broken fence line. By the time they returned to the road, the sky had gone pewter gray. One car passed, slowing only slightly as it swerved around them. A man, maybe 30, eyes flicking once toward the bundle in Daniel's arms before accelerating away. Not everyone saw what mattered. Not everyone wanted to. Halfway back to the shelter, an old vet's station turned rescue clinic where Daniel sometimes volunteered. The dog stumbled. She tried to recover, but her rear leg collapsed inward. Daniel stopped walking. She didn't make a sound. Just lay there for a moment, chest heaving, head tilted toward the bundle. He hesitated, then reached down and touched her side. She flinched. He waited. Slowly, she leaned her weight into his palm when he gathered her into his arms. She didn't resist. By the time they reached the shelter's backlot, the rain had thickened into something steadier, not violent, just persistent. It tapped on the tin roof like a slow clock ticking down. Inside, the lights were on, the walls lined with crates and worn towels. A radio played softly somewhere in the back, the same voice repeating weather updates no one was listening to. Daniel set the pup down first, then the dog beside her. The vet on call, Myra Sharpard, and steady-handed, said nothing as she stepped forward. She saw the wound. She saw the trembling. She glanced at Daniel, and something passed between them. Not shock, not even urgency. Just a question neither could yet name. Then she said quietly, "How far did she carry them?" Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came. Only silence. In the corner, the pup stirred again, a faint cry, rasped from its throat like it was calling out through layers of cloth. The dog lifted her head, but her eyes weren't on the pup anymore. They were fixed on the far side of the room where, through the half-open storage door, a second, smaller blanket lay crumpled, already stained, already empty. The moment passed like breath on cold glass there, then gone. The blanket lay still again, the soft mound beneath it unmoving. Daniel didn't blink. The dog hadn't moved either, though a tremor ran through her hind leg as if her body was catching up to a pain she'd been holding off for hours. A breeze skimmed the clearing, stirring a handful of brown leaves into a slow spiral. They drifted across the cracked concrete and caught against the edge of the trough. The sun, now veiled behind thin cloud, cast no shadows. Then it happened again. Not a twitch this time, but a sound, thin, dry, almost like breath against wool. Daniel stepped forward, slow as if the air itself might shatter. He crouched, peeled back the blanket with care, and there between folds of matted fleece and damp cloth was a second pup. Smaller, pale tan, with a dark muzzle and legs tucked tight into its chest. Its eyes were still closed, its movements clumsy. Like a creature halfway between birth and vanishing, it let out a weak, gurgled sound, barely more than a whimper, and the mother's head snapped upward. She didn't look at the pup. She looked at Daniel. There was no warning in her eyes, only something quieter, untrusting, yes, but not out of instinct, out of history. She'd learned, somewhere along the line, that help came late, that humans didn't arrive until the warmth had already drained. Sat back on his heels, raising his hands instinctively, not in fear but in surrender. "I see you," he said, softly. The dog blinked once, then turned her gaze down toward the pup. The one beside it, still unmoving, had not stirred again. He didn't touch them, not yet. Instead, he removed his jacket and slowly laid it on the ground near her, letting the scent of it drift across the dry grass. She sniffed once, hesitated, then gently nosed the living pup toward it. Not far, just enough to test. Just enough to let him carry that moment's weight. He picked the tiny body up as if it were made of breath and bone china. It was warm, too. Warm, fevered. Its mouth opened in slow, sticky gasps, legs kicking weakly at nothing. Heat throbbed from its belly, and the pads of its paws felt dry and tacky. It needed more than a gesture. It needed help. Now he looked at her again. Her body had slumped forward slightly, the exhaustion in her hips unmistakable now that she'd unburdened herself, but she watched every move, tracking the pup in his hands with a soldier's quiet, unreadable focus. Something behind them cracked. It wasn't loud, but it didn't belong. Daniel stood up slowly, turning toward the tree line. The noise had come from the far side of the clearing. A branch snapped mid-bend, not wind, not wildlife. And then he saw at just the edge of it a flash of movement low to the ground. Not human, not dog, not safe. Coyotes wouldn't usually approach in daylight, but this wasn't usual. And something about the lean, pale frame he glimpsed between trees' back tail told him it had been watching for some time. Daniel moved closer to the dog without thinking. She hadn't seen it, or maybe she had and was too spent to care. "We have to go," he murmured, but the dog didn't rise. She just lowered her head and nudged the motionless pup again, one last time, before stepping away from it. That was the moment Daniel understood. She wasn't carrying the dead one to save it. She'd already done what she could. She was carrying it so it wouldn't be left behind, so it wouldn't rot under a ditch or be torn apart by teeth that never waited for grief. The living one in his arms gave a soft, rattled cry. The mother turned at the sound, something shifting in her posture. For the first time, she took a step toward him, not to challenge, not to reclaim, but as if testing the shape of what came next from the trees. Another movement, a second coyote now. The wind carried the scent. They were circling Dawn. Daniel backed up slowly, clutching the pup to his chest. He didn't run. Running would mean the dog wouldn't follow. Running would turn this into panic, and panic always ended with something torn open. He glanced down. The dog was walking beside him now, shoulders stiff, her steps faltering but focused. She didn't look back at the pup left under the blanket. Not even once. They reached the edge of the path again. He didn't know where he would take her. The truck was a mile away. The vet might not even be open this early. But it didn't matter now. Behind them, the clearing grew quiet again, except for one sound, the faint rustle of the blanket. The blanket stirred again, just once, then went still. Daniel paused at the tree line, glancing back only once. The coyotes hadn't advanced. They stood at the far end of the clearing, silent, watchful, held at bay by something older than threat. The dog beside him turned, too, and looked, with fear but with something that hovered between farewell and acceptance. She didn't move toward the pup she'd left beneath the folds. She didn't try to bury it or drag it further. Whatever she needed to do for that little body she had already done. They reached the truck just as the sun broke through a shelf of cloud, casting a thin, tired light over the fields. Daniel opened the door, then hesitated. The dog stood beside him, unmoving. Her breath came in slow, heavy drags. The pup in his arms whimpered, a faint cracked sound like wind through an empty bottle. The warmth radiating from its chest had grown hotter, dangerously so. But it was alive, just barely. He climbed into the cab and waited. After a moment, she followed, carefully, one paw up, then the other, her body folding gently into the floorboard, as if she'd done it before, years ago, in another life. He didn't speak, neither did she. There was no need. The road back was rough and dry, dust spiraling up in the rear view like smoke from a memory. The vet was 20 miles out. It was a Sunday. He didn't know if they'd be open, but he drove. The building was closed, of course. It always was when you needed it not to be. He waited anyway. The dog lay on the passenger floor, her eyes half shut but not asleep. He offered her water from the bottle in the glove compartment, and she took it with slow, deliberate laps, never moving her gaze from the pup now curled on Daniel's lap, a towel wrapped tight around its body. Eventually a woman pulled up behind them in a dusty SUV, the vet's assistant. She recognized him vaguely. His sister had brought in a barn cat here last spring. The assistant unlocked the door and let them in without questions. What happened next was quiet. No drama, no miracle. The pup had an infection, bad but treatable. Dehydrated, underfed, fighting. The assistant cleaned him, warmed him, started fluids. The dog watched from across the room, never barking, never rising, just watching. Daniel didn't stay long. When the assistant asked if the dog was his, he shook his head. But when she asked if he'd be coming back, he didn't answer at all. Night. The fields were silent again. The coyotes had moved on. The clearing sat empty beneath a silver sky. The blanket still rumpled at the center. In the wind it fluttered, revealing just a glimpse of the pup that had not stirred again. But something had changed. The next morning Daniel returned, not with food, not with traps, just with his presence. The blanket was still there. He knelt beside it. The coyotes hadn't touched it. They'd walked around it, their tracks curving. In a wide berth the earth was undisturbed. As if something had been understood, he buried the pup beneath the tree at the edge of the clearing, where the roots pushed gently up through the soil. Not deep, just enough to keep the world from undoing what the mother had protected. When he stood again, the air felt different, lighter. Over the next few days, the dog stayed near his house, not close, not inside. She made a den beneath an old shed behind the barn, out of the wind, near the warmth of old wood and engine grease. She didn't bark. She didn't beg. Sometimes she would disappear for hours and return with traces of mud on her legs and burrs in her tail. But she always came back, and the pup, he pulled through. Slowly the infection broke, the fever ebbed. He grew into his bones with a quiet stubbornness that didn't match his size. When Daniel brought him out into the yard weeks later, the dog didn't run to him or nuzzle or whine. She simply rose, padded forward, and sat beside him. For a long time, she didn't even look at the pup. Then, finally, she licked his ear once and lay down beside him, not to guard, not to claim, just to be near. As the season turned, the dog began to roam again. Longer stretches, further fields. Each time she returned a little slower, and then one day, she did in single quotes t. Daniel searched, but not frantically. He knew. She had gone the way she'd come, on her own terms, without ceremony, without sound. Sometimes in the colder months he thinks he sees her at the far end of the pasture, a shape, black against the frost, pausing at the fence line before vanishing into the brush. The pup, now nearly grown, lies under that same shed, watching the road, waiting for nothing in particular, and in the clearing under the tree, the wind, it still lifts dust across a smooth patch of earth, No marker, just memory.